Good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day to our moms on this, at least here in East Central Indiana, a gloomy, rainy morning. I wish we could have had as perfect of a day today for our moms as we had yesterday, but nonetheless, we take the rain too, right? Take the sun, take the rain. God uses it all. But it's good to see everyone this morning, those of you in the room. Those of you that are joining us online, thanks for being with us. I do want to just offer a quick apology. I know over the last couple of weeks we have had some streaming issues. It's been connected to our internet provider. We're trying to get all of that worked out. Hopefully today we won't have any problems, but I want to apologize for that. I know that it's kind of been troublesome for some of you, so hopefully today we'll do a little bit better. Before we get into the message today, last week when I was sharing, I talked about standing in the gap and how we all need to step up to restore our church after everything that's happened over this last year. And we did receive quite a few papers this week, inserts of those who said they would step up and help in some way. And I also said that maybe some of you might need a week or so to pray and think about it. And on your seats this morning, if you're here in the room, those sheets are once again there in the midst of all those inserts that are there. And I want to invite you to consider filling that out and turning it in. You can just put it in one of the boxes following our service today. But I really want to encourage you to consider how is it that you can step up to help bring restoration back to our church. We need it in so many different areas, and so I would really encourage you to think about that. Well, today I want to start off by asking you this question. How many of you have been told that you can't do something? You ever been told that before? I was laughing when I was watching one of the kids talk here on the Mother's Day video earlier, that one of them said something to the effect of, well, I love my mom most of the time when she lets me do things most of the time, right? There are those times when maybe mom's like, I don't know if you should do that. And I could think of many times when my mom did that for me. And you know, one of the earliest things that I can remember being told that I couldn't do something when I was back in first grade, I think I might have shared the story before, but when I was in first grade, I had a really hard time learning how to read. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I started school a little earlier than most kids did. But during my first grade year, I struggled reading. And after my first grade year, I was told that I would have to repeat the first grade, which is what I did. I repeated first grade again. But I can remember in those moments when I was getting that remedial learning there in that second year, that I just remember having this sense from some of my teachers that they probably didn't think I was going to go anywhere. You know, that I might be able to make it through school, but I can remember thinking as a kid, when I was repeating that second year, I thought, maybe I just can't cut it. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. Maybe I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to do this school thing. And I had this feeling that I was just going to struggle through school through the rest of the years of my life. And I have to admit that at times I should have maybe talked to my mom or my dad more than what I did. But, you know, I really struggled that year. But you know what? I know that all of us in here today, and those of you watching online, somewhere along the way, each and every one of us have all been questioned or maybe even ridiculed because we've been told that we can't do something. Maybe as a kid, maybe we're ridiculed for not being good enough. Maybe it's in a sport. Maybe it's at school like it was for me. Maybe it's we weren't popular enough to be in a certain group of kids. And then perhaps as you grew, some people thought that maybe you couldn't pass a class. Maybe you couldn't graduate high school or college if that's where you went, or technical school, or that you wouldn't advance in your work. And as we grow older, it seems like the ridicule usually becomes something that's less outward and more that's inward. I think the ridicule as we grow into adulthood often switches from ridicule that comes from other people. And I'm not saying that doesn't still happen, but it's less so, and it's more of a ridicule of ourselves, where we question our ability to be a good parent or a good worker, a good spouse or a good friend. We make the mistake of looking at other people's success, and then what do? We ridicule ourselves, and we start saying that we're not good enough, that we should be like them, that we should have more money, we should have more friends, we should have more influence. And then what we do is we come back to our perceived, deficiencies in our life, and the cycle just seems to happen over and over again, where we're constantly ridiculing ourselves for not meeting some supposed standard that either we've made for ourselves or society has made toward us. And I believe a lot of us are there right now. I think right now, a lot of us are in that place right now, as we're trying to pick up the pieces from this pandemic. As we are starting to rebuild our lives, we are wondering, can we really get things back to where they were? Can we get back to where we had started, to where we had been? Now see, in Nehemiah chapter 4, the people of Jerusalem, they had heard the call of Nehemiah to rebuild their city. After the time of prayer, we know that Nehemiah was then allowed by the Emperor Artaxerxes to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the city. And after examining it and praying and getting a feel and a sense of the place, he then went out around the walls and found out and discovered a plan in order to rebuild the city. And then he invited the people to join in. And join in they did. And last week we saw that all different types of people from all different livelihoods and walks of life, priests and goldsmiths, perfume makers and merchants, they all joined together and they rebuilt the city. But what would happen though when opposition and ridicule popped up? Because it did. And that's what we're going to look at today in chapter 4. So if you're not there already, I'd invite you to open your Bibles. We'll also have the text here on the screens. If you're in the room, it should be on the bottom. I want to invite you to use the Bible app as well. Our church's app actually has a Bible as well. I'd invite you to do that. But let's go ahead and read through this text together. And I'll stop just briefly in a few spots here to point a few things out. But it says, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. Now, Sanballat was a Samaritan, okay? So keep that in mind. The Samaritans lived just north of where we would consider today where Jerusalem is. They lived just north in that region. They had intermarried with other people groups. So there was even in Jesus' time we see this, there was an unhappiness, let's say, between the Jews and the Samaritans over this. So Sanballat wasn't happy, and he ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day?" You hear the ridicule? He says, "Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" And then Tobiah the Ammonite, so here we have another people group, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, if even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their wall of stones." "Hear us, O God." And then here's Nehemiah. "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." You know, when I look at this, I'm really interested here to see how Nehemiah responds. What does he do? He responds with prayer. And it's neat here how he interjects this prayer into this account. He wasn't afraid to ask God to destroy those people or destroy the plot that was going to stand in the way of God's will being done. Now today when we pray, I think sometimes we're afraid to pray that kind of prayer because it seems kind of unloving, doesn't it, to pray against someone. But what Nehemiah here is, he's not praying per se against someone. He's praying against those who stand in the way of God's will. He wants God's will to be accomplished. And so he goes to God and he prays and he's like, "God, please stand with us, stand against them as we seek to accomplish your will." And so then in verse 6 it says, "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod," so now the group keeps getting bigger, right? There's more opposition. "They heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stir up trouble against it." So let's get this right here. The Jews there in Jerusalem and others who are helping with the rebuilding, they're having success. The restoration is moving forward. Things are going well. And then what happens? We see then resistance and opposition pop up. I want you to know that anytime we are successful in the work of the Lord, something that's going to happen is opposition. I've seen that here within our own church. When things are going well, it seems like that's when Satan's doing his work the most. That's when he's working the hardest. And that's what we see happening here. They started to, Sanballat and all of his cohorts there, they were trying to sap the joy, trying to sap the courage of the people there in Jerusalem. But in verse 9, Nehemiah says this, "But we prayed to our God." I love that. He brings it up again. We see that throughout this book, don't we? Over and over again, prayer, prayer, prayer. "But we prayed to our God, and we posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." I'm going to come back to this in just a little bit, but this is so important. Not only did they pray, but they also acted. Sometimes I think we make the mistake of doing one or the other or not both, and I'll come back to that. Verse 10, "Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, 'The strength of the laborers is giving out.'" So maybe some of the words from Tobiah and some of his buddies are starting to kind of pull them down a little bit, those in Jerusalem. And then they said, "There is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." And also our enemies said, "Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to their work." And then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, "Wherever you turn, they're going to attack us." I mean, you could sense the desperation here, right? They're getting worried. "Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. And after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes.'" See, he knew that if they stood next to the people that they loved the most, the people that supported them the most, that they would fight harder. I think that's a really good concept. And then in verse 15, "When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. And from that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. And the officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. And those who carried materials did their work with one hand, and they held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me." I love this passage, because here we see her that rebuilding your life, sometimes it's going to require getting in some fights. Sometimes it's going to require standing ready for fights. And what do we fight with? We fight with prayer. We fight for what is right. We fight for what God has called us to do. And then in verse 19 it said, "Then I said to the noble, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'The work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us.'" Love that. So we continued the work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. And at that time I also said to the people, "Have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve as guards by night and workmen by day. And neither I nor my brothers nor anyone else even went for water," because everybody had their own weapons. You know, as we look here in this passage, we see something here that I think is so important. You know, restoration that we've been talking about through this whole series. Wouldn't it be so much easier if it was just easy? Wouldn't restoration be so much easier if it was? I mean, and really that is why so many people whose lives have been shattered, they don't pick up the pieces. And it doesn't mean because they haven't tried. I can tell you through the years, so many people that have come and talked to me about different things that have happened in their life, things that have absolutely shattered their lives. And there's a group of people who have been able to rebuild from that, and there's a group of people that's come and spoke to me through the years that haven't. So it's not that people don't try, but it's because it's hard. Restoration is hard. I mean, maybe the person who tried to restore their lives, they worked really hard at it, but something from within them or something outside of them stood in the way of that restoration taking place, and they just gave up. We've all done that ourselves, I bet you too. Each and every one of us, we've been confronted by something, both either something in our mind or something outside of us that has stood in the way of restoration. Restoration is never easy. restoration is always going to come with resistance. If we want our lives to be rebuilt, we have to understand and we have to accept that restoration is going to come with challenges. There are challenges involved in it. I mean, life throws the unexpected at us. We go to the doctor and we're told that we have cancer just right out of the blue. We show up to work one day and we're told that we no longer have a job. We get home and our spouse is gone. What do we do when those kinds of things happen? What do we do when our lives come crashing down? Well, of course, we all want to get back on track. We all want to move in a good direction. And that path of restoration, like we're seeing right now in our world, it's going to take days, months, and even years for that restoration to take place. But we have to understand that we are at our most vulnerable when we are trying to rebuild. I already mentioned that Satan is always on the prowl, and he's especially on the prowl when he finds someone who is wounded. There's a lot of wounded people in our world right now, and all of us are wounded in some way. And sometimes what can happen is we can be so focused on the task at hand of rebuilding that we don't look around us and realize that there may be people or situations that could stop our restoration in its tracks. Sometimes these people, those people around us, even our family members or our friends, can be those people that can stand in the way of our restoration. Yes, we love them. Maybe we even trust them, but maybe they're negative and they're not bringing positivity and help and the Lord's word into your life. You know what? After all of the ridicule of their neighbors, Nehemiah comes in there in verses 16 through 18, which I think is the key passage here. And what does he say there again? He says that they did two things. They did two things. Right there in verse 17, it says that those who carried materials did their work with one hand and they held a sword with another. And so what I brought with me today, I brought with me a sword. There we go. And a trowel, right? That's what they did. I mean, think of the work they did. I mean, they're out here watching for enemies and they're prepared for action, but they're also prepared to work. And I think for us in this period of restoration, this is the way we're going to have to be. Yes, we have to do the work of restoration, but we also have to be ready for the enemies that may pop up. It could be people, it could be circumstances. But are we ready? Are we holding the trowel and are we holding the sword? Are we holding both? Are we ready for those things that may pop up? So important and something that we can easily overlook. Because see, here's the point today. The point is this, is that building a future might mean fighting for it. We may have to fight for it. I mean, I want you to think of something maybe that God has put in your heart that is so important that you feel like God is calling you to do. Maybe it's being a better parent or a grandparent, maybe a better worker, maybe a better follower of Christ. Are you willing to fight for that when opposition comes? Are you willing to stand up and fight for it? I mean, if you want to be a better parent, are you going to stand up and fight when work wants you gone more and you can't be the parent God's calling you to be? Maybe you want to work more to make more money, but you're sacrificing that time with your kids. That you've got to stand up and you have to fight. You have to say, being with my kids is more important than the money. If you want to be better at what you do, will you fight when distractions come your way? When it comes to following Jesus, will other activities even stand in the way? Will sports and entertainment, maybe even family, stand in the way of you getting to know Jesus better? Will they distract you? Because see, when we start getting in this process of restoration and we think things are just coasting along and things are going good, that's when we get into trouble. When we start to coast, we can get into trouble. See, what I mean is that the process of restoration is not an easy one, and it's not one that's going to happen without us being fully diligent and focused on the work at hand. And when we get lazy, and when we're not mindful, and when we're not aware and looking around, that's when opposition kicks in. So what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do to be more vigilant as Christ followers? I mean, as we rebuild from this pandemic, from maybe past hurts or difficult circumstances, we have to be vigilant because enemies within us like our attitudes and our actions, as well as the enemies outside of us, like people and like circumstances, can take all the work the work that we've put into rebuilding and put it into disarray. So what are some steps we can take? That's what I want to ask you. What are some steps that we can take to be more vigilant? So here's the first one I want to share with you today, and it's this. We need to face the opposition. We have to face it. We have to know that opposition is out there. Don't be afraid to identify what or who stands in the way of God accomplishing His will in you. It could be yourself. Maybe there's an attitude that has permeated your heart and permeated your mind, and it has totally darkened the way that God wants you to look at life or to look at people or to look at situations or circumstances. I'll tell you, in my adult years especially, it's been myself that stood in the way of restoration more than anyone else. And I can probably say that for you too. But it could be something outside of you as well. As you're trying to rebuild your life, not everybody's going to be pleased with that. There are some people that don't want good for you. There will be doubters. There will be naysayers who are going to say, oh, you're so irreversibly damaged. There's no way that you can come back from that. See, I've come to the realization, looking at this text, a big part of the restoration process is not just the process itself, but it's what you do when you hit a snag. God isn't just about restoring you through the process of restoration itself, but He's also trying to build you up and strengthen you by allowing certain obstacles to stand in the way to help you grow through them. I mean, what are you going to do when you have a small setback or a large one? Are you just going to give up on the process? I shared with you a few weeks ago that I've started a process of working out and getting on a diet. I've started that. So far, things are going pretty good. Pretty happy with where I'm going. But I'll tell you, this week, there was a couple of times where some snags came up. You know, when you're sitting around and you feel the stomach, you know, it's like, hey, come on, you need to eat a little bit more. My wife, she made some amazing burritos this week for Cinco de Mayo, okay, on Wednesday. And she brought that thing out, and let me tell you, I was having to say, get behind me, Satan, when I was looking at those burritos, okay? Because let me tell you, I wanted to just pig out on them. And I had one, and I kept it there. I was proud of myself. But those are very small and minute things. But in life, that's what happens. When we're trying to restore, when we're trying to move in a different direction, in a better direction, those snags are going to come up. And God's testing to see, okay, what are we going to do with that? And that strengthens our resolve, and that builds us as people. And so the question is, what are you going to do when you have a setback? Will you rise up and fight back, or are you going to just fall over and give in? So we need to face the opposition. The next one here is that we also need to do this. We need to have prayer over fear. Over and over in this book, one of the beautiful things of the book of Nehemiah is how often he talks about prayer. Over and again. Prayer, you could just see it permeating everything that he did, everything that he does. You know what? Sometimes we respond to threats with action, and we do little prayer. But as we see here, Nehemiah, what did he do first? Before he acted, he prayed. Before he goes to Jerusalem, before he talks to Artaxerxes, what did he do? He prayed. Before he responds to the opposition, what did he do? He prayed. We see this over and over again. See, he didn't let the fear of the enemies overwhelm him, but took it to the one who could overwhelm any enemy. He knew he couldn't do it, but he knew God could. See, there is always time for us to pray. Even in those moments where we have to make a quick split decision, there are those moments where we can take a breath and we can pray. And instead of dwelling on the fear that comes from what might happen, we can instead stop and pray and ask God, hey, God, what is it that you want me to do here? And then proceed. In Psalm 56, 3-4, it says this, when I am afraid, I will trust in you, in God whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me? But see, the danger is, and we have to be careful here, is because in other times we might be tempted to pray but not take action. I can't tell you how many times myself and really the church, all of us, what we have done is we have used God as a reason, and I know this doesn't make sense, but it's true. We have used God as a reason to be fearful. We spiritualize it. We say, well, I'm going to pray about this, and we go weeks and months and maybe even years and keep saying, well, I'm waiting on God. We're using God as an excuse. Waiting on God to move. I'm waiting on God to move. I don't know. I don't think God wants to be used in that way. He wants us to talk to Him, but He also then, in faith, wants us to step out and act, and that's what Nehemiah does here. Yes, he took a time to pray, but he also felt in his heart that God was leading him in a certain direction in the rebuilding of the city. And so as he did it, he prayed, and God led him along. Don't keep your fear from praying and to keep you from doing. That's one of the big things I see in my own life, probably in yours too. So again, I just want to say again, prayer over fear. Now, here's the third thing we can learn here, okay? If we're trying to be vigilant, is reinforce with the right people. You know what? We're going to need to lean on people when we're going through this restoration process. We need people who are going to be there to encourage and lift us up. Nehemiah knew, if you look there in the text, that by putting families together and warriors and soldiers in the right places, that they could withstand anything that could be thrown at them. He knew that that's what they could do. And so I'm asking you, who are the people that you will fight with during this period of restoration? Who can you trust to back you when enemies come? When tribulation and struggles come your way, who can you reach out to get the help and encouragement that you need? Who will stand? Who will stand with you and do this, right? Who will stand ready to fight for you and also ready to work with you? Who are those people going to be? Because, see, sometimes maybe we can find this kind of person who will work with us, but when opposition comes, they wilt away. You know, I think back to the years of people in my life that I've appreciated the help they've given me, but whenever the opposition comes, they're not ready to fight. And they wilt away. They go somewhere else. And maybe there's some people in your life, all they want to do is fight. That's not good either. Because we need people that helps to build. So you see, who are these people going to be? Who are the people that you can look to be the ones who will fight with you, but will also work with you? Who will help you stand and rebuild? In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, it says this: if either of them, if a couple of people, if one person falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. You know, perhaps a close friend, a family member, a pastor, a counselor, they can be someone that can help you stand up. Who do you need to talk to and ask them to stand with you, to fight with you, to work with you? I want you to know that our greatest advocate, of course, is Jesus himself. Jesus is our greatest advocate. If you go just a couple of verses further there in Ecclesiastes, in verse 12, it says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, but what? A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Who is the third strand? Well, we have ourselves and we have our friends or our family. Who is the third strand? It's Jesus. Jesus is that third strand. When you have people there to back you and when you have Jesus walking with you in your life, it is a cord that is not quickly broken. It is one that can stand the test of time. And so again, who will you stand with? Who will you reinforce your life with? Will you reinforce with the right people? And then finally, one other way that we can be vigilant. And just hang with me here for a second. And it's this one. It's to get on with it. Now, I'm not saying here that you get over it. There's a difference. I'm not saying that when you have a circumstance that comes your way that is devastating, that you should just, I'm not up here saying, just get over it. Don't, because we have to work through that. But what I am saying is to get on with it, to keep pushing ahead, to keep persevering. I can't tell you how many times in my own life I have felt dispirited, but what do? I just have to get up and I have to keep on going. And that is exactly what we see Nehemiah and the people of Jerusalem do. They don't just sit, yes, they had a period there where they were like, what are we going to do? But they got up and they kept at it and they got on with it. I've shared with you before, a few years ago when I was going through a tough time in my life. You know what? I'm not sure that I was the most effective person and the most effective in my ministry in that period. But what I can tell you is that I got up every day and I kept fighting the battle. You have to just keep on with it. You have to get on with it. And eventually what I found is that things got better. As I continued to walk in faith and trust that God was going to restore me, He made me better. And that's what I want to encourage you to do as we walk through this. Is to not give up on yourself, not give up on God, but allow Him to work through you and just get on with it. My challenge for us this week is this, is to identify the weakest place or the weakest point in your recovery. You know, all of us right now are going through some kind of restoration in our lives, but it could be other things that are going on in our lives as well. Maybe you've lost a job and you're under a financial crunch. Maybe something at school happened and you're really hurt from it. Maybe a relationship has hurt you, a bad relationship has hurt you deeply. Where is the place that you have been hurt the most in? Now think of that for a second. Where are you hurting the most? And what are you doing to stand tall and to fight back? Who are the people in your life? Have you faced the opposition? Who can you pray with? What do you need to do to just get up and to push back? What is that situation and who are the people that you need? Because here's the facts. The fact is if you don't stand ready to fight, you might have to start all over again. I've been there before too. And that's okay if you get there. You got to start all over and that's fine. But let's not get there. Let's find people to stand with us who are willing to fight. Who are willing to fight in prayer. Who are willing to stand up with you when opposition comes. Who are willing to tell you maybe even that you are wrong sometimes in the way you are looking at things because maybe you're an enemy unto yourself. Let's not go back to that place. Let's find people to stand with. Indeed, stand up and be counted. Fight for the future that God wants for you today. You know, when I started today, I shared how in my early years in education, it was rough. Some of the earliest teachers, they didn't have a lot of faith in me. Well, my third grade year, I moved to a different community. My parents moved there after my father's retirement. And let me tell you, it was a whole different story. The teachers who are around were very helpful and encouraging. And they challenged me. The right people were there to reinforce me. And it made all the difference. And maybe you need to be that person for someone else. And maybe you need to find somebody who is like that for you. Find someone to stand with you as you battle so that as you rebuild, God can accomplish the work in you that He desires.